Donald Trump arrived at the UN General Assembly in New York, having told the world that he hates his opponents. Here he was, poised, ready to attack. Nothing would stand in his way.
Mr. President, do you still believe in the UN? What's your message to countries recognising Palestine?
Well, almost nothing. The president riled up before he even got to the stage, and he wanted everyone in the room to know it.
I ended 7 wars and never even received a phone call from the United Nations. All I got from the United Nations was an escalator that on the way up stopped right in the middle. If the First Lady wasn't in great shape, she would have fallen.
And with that, the president let rip.
What is the purpose of the United Nations? The UN has such tremendous potential. I've always said it. It has such tremendous, tremendous potential. But it's not even coming close to living up to that potential. For the most part, at least for now, all they seem to do is write a really strongly worded letter and then never follow that letter up.
Next was Israel's invasion of Gaza and a dig at US allies, including the UK, who formally recognized a Palestinian state this week.
The rewards would be too great for Hamas terrorists for their atrocities. This would be a reward for these horrible atrocities. But instead of giving in to Hamas's ransom demands, those who want peace should be united with one message: release the hostages now. Just release the hostages now.
There was relief from Israel's ambassador to the UN.
We're grateful for President Trump for a powerful speech.
Are you angry with countries recognizing Palestinian statehood?
No, I think President Trump actually showed the truth to the world, and it's connected to reality. It's not detached from reality.
Do you think other countries are detached from reality?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you.
An accusation no doubt levelled at Britain, France, Australia and Canada for taking a stand this week. But at the UN, it was the American position that looked increasingly isolated.
This is not a fight against terrorism. This is an occupation, deportation, exile, genocide and mass destruction policy carried out by evoking the events of October the 7th.
Meanwhile, Donald Trump wasn't finished yet.
Everyone thought Russia would win this war in 3 days, but it didn't work out that way. It was supposed to be just a quick little skirmish. It's not making Russia look good.
His anger at Russia spilled over to India and China, who weren't the only ones he accused of funding the war in Ukraine.
But inexcusably, even NATO countries have not cut off much Russian energy. Think of it. They're funding the war against themselves.
Europe came under fire on immigration as well.
It's uncontrolled. Your countries are being ruined. I look at London, where you have a terrible mayor, terrible, terrible mayor. And it's been so changed, so changed. Now they want to go to Sharia law.
Actually, no, there are no plans for Sharia law in London. Her spokeswoman for Mayor Sadiq Khan said she would not dignify these appalling and bigoted comments with a response, although did release data comparing London's much lower crime rates to those in the US.
I'm really good at this stuff. Your countries are going to hell.
And then an extraordinary attack on attempts to tackle climate change.
They were going all green. All green is all bankrupt. That's what it represents. The carbon footprint is a hoax made up by people with evil intentions. It's a con job.
Climate studies make clear that it is definitely not a con. This was a rambling attack in all directions, a speech that floored many of its spectators. Even for Donald Trump, they saw this as quite something.
That was a wild ride. Donald Trump always gives quite meandering speeches. He likes throwing out sound bites, but this was Trump to the power of 10.
And he particularly attacked Europe. Given how European leaders have behaved, does this show it's not worth sucking up to Donald Trump?
I think we have seen time and again that European leaders think they have got Donald Trump sort of a little closer to them, and then he always pushes them back. And that's what we saw today.
But these were words, so the question now is what actions will follow. And if Donald Trump is as serious as he sounds, who will fight back against him?
And Anushka joins me now. Anushka, quite a speech, quite a day.
Yeah, I mean, extraordinary words. But let's just talk about whether those words actually lead to any action. You know, after saying all that about the UN, the president sat down with the UN General Secretary, Antonio Guterres, and you won't believe what he said. He said the US is 100% behind the UN. And look, there are some people who thought he would come here and he would remove the US from the UN. That said, the US has been starving the UN of funds.
Yeah.
On Russia, yes, some angry words about European countries buying oil, but ultimately still a long way from when he was dressing down Zelensky in the White House. And on climate, it is a problem when the world's biggest emitter steps back from the table, but also an opportunity, sources tell me in the British government, for wind companies in our country, for example. Now, you have heard today protests down the road. There is a fight back on the streets, but there are a lot of questions here about where the political fight back will come from, with Democrats at the moment seeming quite rudderless.
Right, and we haven't even talked about that ridiculous stuff about all the marble and the plastic in the building. You can take the man out of real estate, but you cannot take real estate out of the man. Anushka, thank you very much. Now, earlier I spoke to Danielle Pletka, a foreign policy expert from the American Enterprise Institute, a conservative think tank in Washington, D.C. And I started by asking whether she thought that President Trump's speech was a battle cry against the very institution that he had been invited to address.
Well, yes and no. I think that it's probably right to interpret this as a condemnation of the United Nations and everything it's done and everything it stands for and its effectiveness. But in general, I don't think that the president intended it that way. What he really likes to do is talk to his American audience, and I think that's what he does wherever he is, including before the UN General Assembly.
Even though the audience was global, certainly the audience in the room, and many of whom are his friends or people who think they can do business with him.
What we've learned about Donald Trump is he can do business with anybody. It doesn't matter what he says, but he wasn't interested in using the opportunity of a speech before the General Assembly to make a speech to the General Assembly. He didn't do that, and I guess that I was probably a little off base in hoping he would, because he doesn't ever do that.
I mean, there were things in the speech, though, that scientifically, were wrong. I mean, when he called climate change a hoax and a con, and he said we were all going to hell in Europe because of our green policies. I mean, there is an economic argument to be made for climate change that many people, including people on the conservative side of the spectrum, think is a rather good idea.
Really? You're going to have to introduce me to those people. I think he'll find a very welcoming audience here in the United States. And again, it's not to deny that there are issues that we should contend with. It is to deny that the United Nations has contributed anything but the most rampant hysteria to the debate.
He basically said it doesn't exist. It was straightforward climate change denial, and more than that, he called it a hoax and a con.
Well, he is the President of the United States, and he can call it whatever he likes. It was his speech.
Still, when he gets it wrong, and when he then laces his speech with sort of bombastic self-praise about all the wars that he's ended and all that stuff, and the Nobel Peace Prize, I mean, he's supposed to be a serious person in a serious job. Didn't that make you laugh or smirk?
Not everybody can live up to the high standards of Channel 4, and I realize that many American presidents don't, especially on the right. At the end of the day, he doesn't really need your approval, nor your fact-checking, nor anything else.
Just on that issue of Europe and European nations who are members of NATO buying Russian oil through the back door, I mean, that is indeed happening, and he was right to call it out, but one of those nations is being run by his good friend Viktor Orban. He didn't call Viktor Orban out, but he had a go at the mayor of London.
You are exactly right. The Hungarians are buying Russian oil. The Turks, our great NATO allies, are buying Russian oil. And he did not call out either of them. I'm certainly with him when he calls out Sadiq Khan, but that's not terribly relevant to the question of who's buying Russian oil. And he's going to have to face up to that reality. And if he wants to be true to what he's promised, then he's going to either have to tariff his good friends or sanction his good friends, or step back.
First of all, there is no Sharia law in London. Sadiq Khan is not trying to impose Sharia law. And the point in that question was that he's very selective about who he shames and names in public and who he doesn't.
Right. Well, he's not really in this game to satisfy you and your apples and oranges standards. He's in this for something else. And so, yes, like most politicians, he tends not to call out his friends, and he tends to call out people who he considers his enemies. That's the way it is here. That's the way it is with most politicians.
He's the new sheriff in town, you're saying?
He is indeed the President of the United States, and he has 3 more United Nations addresses to go.
Something to look forward to. Daniel Pletko, thank you very much.
I know you will. Take care.
Well, I've also been speaking to Mary Robinson, former UN High Commissioner for Human Rights and former President of Ireland, who now heads the group called the Elders, former global leaders who advocate on climate change amongst other issues. And I began by asking what she made of Mr. Trump's claim that climate change was a con.
In many ways, President Trump has said things like this before, but staying in the United Nations, where we know that we have to deal with the climate and nature crisis, and the science is telling us we're running out of time, it's incredibly stupid, incredibly reckless.
Stupid and reckless.
Stupid and reckless.
And where does it leave the world? Where does it leave climate change?
Well, it leaves the world able to move on.
Yeah.
I think it gives an opportunity for the EU. The EU has postponed its NDCs, its climate plan, but it shows a range. It needs to be the most ambitious. Europe needs to go ahead. China knows it needs to go ahead, but China also needs to cut its emissions in its own climate plan.
You said that Europe needs to move ahead, but there are many countries in Europe that are either close to getting into power or are in power that have the same opinion of climate change as this man.
I know that there's even an effort by President Trump to encourage more right-wing governments, populist governments, but the EU at the moment is committed, and I hope it will follow through on the commitment to reduce by 90% by 2040. That is actually so much in our economic interests.
But without America participating, or at least acknowledging that it's an issue and believing some of the science, the whole project is doomed, isn't it?
I think it doesn't help, obviously, but actually I don't think it affects countries that know. The science has been speaking to us. There is a climate and nature crisis. We see the wildfires, we see the heat, we see the flooding all over the world. I can tell you, developing countries that are most affected absolutely know what's wrong, what the problem is, and they desperately want a UN to move forward.
I think Trump, who used to be laughed at when he gave a speech like this first time he was in office, and we were seen as an aberration, but he's no longer an aberration, is he? I mean, he is here to stay for at least another 3.5 years. Who knows, maybe longer. He's got the power, and he's got more support around the world.
I don't know if he's got more support. There's a fear factor. People are afraid, and they should not be afraid of a bully. You have to stand up to bullies, and you have to tell them straight.
What would you say to him? If you got him in a room, right, you, Mary Robinson and Donald Trump, especially on the issue of climate change, how would you convince him that you're right and he's wrong?
I would convince him on economic issues that actually the only way we will see a real future is investing in clean energy, green jobs, and that it is incredibly stupid to believe that we need fossil fuel going into the future because it is destroying us. To have the leader of the United States say in the UN that, you know, that this is stupid or chaotic, or, you know, the words he used is really heartbreaking, because we need to move in the other direction.
There have been American presidents in the past who have criticized this body, disdained this body, don't believe in it whatsoever. But Donald Trump is in a different class here, isn't he? He's come to the United Nations, just opposite, by the way, a building that is named after him, Trump Tower 2 or whatever. He's come to the UN, and he's essentially shredded everything this body believes in.
But luckily, governments are prepared to move on without the United Nations. You know, there will be 100 leaders tomorrow with the Secretary General at his climate conference. There will be commitments to the climate plans. The world is moving in the right direction. Unfortunately, there's bad leadership in this one.
Just on Gaza and Israel, he has slammed European countries, including yours, Ireland, for recognizing the state of Palestine as a reward to Hamas. What's your response to that?
You asked me what I'd like to say to President Trump. I'd like to be able to tell him what it felt to be like at the border with Helen Clark, and to know that there were 2 million people on one side desperately needing the food and the humanitarian and the medicines sent in and then sent back, 70% of them coming back for no reason. It is a human-induced famine. Children are dying of malnutrition, and he is largely responsible because he's supporting Prime Minister Netanyahu. So the United States is complicit in this famine and unfolding genocide, and it's on his watch.
President Trump complicit in genocide?
Yes.
Says
Yes.
Mary Robinson.
Yes.
So what does the world do with that? That's a huge charge to level against him. He will disagree. Many of the people in this country will, vehemently disagree against that.
Well,
how do we find a solution?
Look at the other side. There was a very good meeting yesterday of the New York Declaration. There is a package there about peace that's very well worked out. If President Trump wants his Nobel Prize, all he has to do is stop Prime Minister Netanyahu from being such an extremist leader of his people for his own reasons, to avoid jail, to avoid being, convicted of corruption. So, Trump actually could move this in the right direction, and I would be the first to propose him for the Nobel Prize.
If he does that?
Well, who cares about the Nobel Prize? We care about peace.
No sign he's doing it right now?
No.
Mary Robinson, thank you very much. Well, the war in Gaza was high on the agenda here at the General Assembly in New York after the decision by leading Western nations, including the UK, to recognize a Palestinian state, while Israeli attacks on Gaza City have been continuing relentlessly. Let's get the latest from our foreign affairs correspondent, Sikander Kamani, in Jerusalem. Sikander.
Well, Matt, as always, it's been another deadly day in Gaza. Dozens of Palestinians reported killed, including several children who were suffering from malnutrition. Israeli tanks are really now, it seems, pretty much in the heart of Gaza City. One was filmed not far away from Al-Shifa hospital. Meanwhile, Israeli forces are said to have raided the site of another hospital in Gaza City, established by the Jordanians after it was evacuated. Israeli officials say around 600,000 Palestinians have now fled Gaza City. That's around 2/3 of the population, but it still leaves many inside the city. Meanwhile, in the occupied West Bank, there's been yet more deadly settler violence, and Israel has closed off until further notice the Allenby crossing into Jordan. That's for most Palestinians in the West Bank the only way out they have of the territory. It's part of, it seems, Israel's response to this wave of statements of recognition of a Palestinian state.
And Trump has been meeting Arab leaders as well, hasn't he? Tell us about that.
Yeah, that's right. It's expected he was going to be discussing with them how the conflict in Gaza could end, the possibility of when it does, if and when it does end, them sending peacekeeping troops, helping with reconstruction. But frankly, all of this really seems very detached from the reality on the ground, where Israel's assault is very much continuing. And from what we heard from Trump today at the UN, he is still very firmly behind Netanyahu, exerting no pressure, it seems, on him to pull back. One other thing that the Arab and Muslim leaders will be discussing with Trump is the possibility of Netanyahu annexing parts of the occupied West Bank. Expect those leaders to be pressing Trump not to give Netanyahu the green light for that.
Sikander in Jerusalem, thank you very much indeed. Well, earlier I spoke to the UN Human Rights Council Special Rapporteur, Francesca Albanese. She's an outspoken critic of Israel who was recently sanctioned by the Trump administration. And I began by asking her how it felt to be personally sanctioned by the US.
Okay, look, personally, it feels that I've been very effective. I've hit the nerve. Being told that I'm a threat to the global economy gives me a lot of power. Am I that powerful and I'm that incisive? Probably. But the point is that this is so unlawful. It violates, that sanctions violates the UN Charter, violate the Convention on Privileges and Immunities, and also violates the rights of my family members who are impacted without being concerned by my work, which is pro bono to serve the United Nations. So there are so many elements of illegality. Where are the other members of the General Assembly? When will they draw the line to these, again, intimidation techniques that have turned the multilateral system upside down?
And Prime Minister Netanyahu said something very clearly yesterday, that he does not recognize, not only does he not recognize a Palestinian state, he does not want there ever to be a Palestinian state. And President Trump, his backer, seems to agree with him. How futile does that make the whole project of a Palestinian state?
You're speaking as if two states hold the world in their hands. It's impossible that they are hijacking single-handedly together the entire international system, then turning, once again, international law upside down.
You know, you've lived in East Jerusalem. You know what it feels like to be Palestinian in the occupied West Bank. So when the Israeli president, prime minister, who has the power to change that reality, says it's not going to happen, there won't be a state, and if his friend President Trump says the same, then that is a reality that one cannot get away from.
But it's also because of the impunity that has been granted to Israel by the entire international community. And there are layers of responsibility, complicity that have to be pointed to. And the fact is that Europe is the most disappointing of all, because liberal democracies in Europe have proven the fragility of their own systems in order to protect Israel and Israel's crimes.
But it's not just Israel, is it? I mean, we've seen Russia invade Ukraine. We saw Russia, keep the Assad regime alive in Syria for years. I mean, you can't just focus on Israel and its backer, the United States.
Russia has started an unlawful war of aggression against Ukraine, and that Russia is occupying illegally Ukrainian territory. I agree. Although the context matters, and the context is quite different, what I do disagree, though, is the cases are similar, because in the case of Russia, it has taken weeks, if not days or hours, to decide on 19 packages of sanctions against Russia for its unlawful war and aggression. There is still debate on whether it's opportune to cut economic ties with Israel.
And just briefly, what do you think will change practically in the Gaza Strip, or indeed the West Bank, as a result of recognition by these countries?
Probably nothing, but what has pushed instead this recognition is the mounting pressure that comes from the popular base. There is a brewing revolution from the global south to the global north, from west to east, and all countries are in turmoil because of Palestine, and this is the first genocide in plain sight that has generated a global response from civil society, and this is the silver lining of all this.
Francesca Albanese, thank you very much indeed.